All right, let's go. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. Happy New Year, and I am so excited for this year, and I hope you are as well. Today, I am pleased to feature not the normal two, but actually three of the smartest people I've ever met and that you will ever meet. And we will be exploring one of the most fascinating and possibly disruptive technologies to hit our world since the advent of the internet itself. I promise you will leave today thinking, wow, who the hell knew? And also you will leave smarter and more inspired than you arrived. Before we get started, let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people in the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and please make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview itself. Also, to the audience, please make sure your chat is set to address everyone, not just the speakers. I want to thank our sponsors for without their support, we could not keep this series free. Special thanks to First Horizon Bank, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, MedJet, Tennessee Brewworks, and Project Music. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome back the godfather of Who Knew and the very first person I ever featured in the smartest people in the room, Jim Griffin. Jim is currently the vice president of digital rights at PEX. He's an expert media technologist, well-schooled and experienced in the ways of digital media and monetization, especially music and the text, graphics, and video that accompany it. He is well known as the founder and moderator of the Fa List, which for 18 years has been amongst the best global communities for digital music and media. And my favorite way to acknowledge his impact on digital music is Jim was once the very first CTO of the legendary label Geffen Records. And in that job, Jim and his team planned and executed the very first digital download of a musical track. What a slippery slope we've slid down since those days, my friend. And joining Jim as today's two featured guests are two more alums of this platform. First is Damien Riehl. Damien first appeared here in the second episode we ever did in April of 2020, over 160 episodes ago. He is a lawyer, musician, and technologist with experience in complex litigation, digital forensics, and software development. A coder since 1985 and for the web since 1995, Damien helps lead the design, development, and expansion of Fastcase's data science efforts, integrating AI-backed technologies to improve legal workflows and to power legal data analytics. In 2019, Damien gave a TED Talk on his All the Music project, which to date has computationally composed 400 billion, that's billion with a B for you all out there, melodies, and has written them to disk, fixed in a tangible medium, and has given the public access through Creative Commons 0, which provides similar rights to rights works in the public domain. Damien's project has contributed to discussions between lawyers, musicians, and industry professionals regarding one, copyrightability of machine-created works, and two, copyrightability of melodies alone. Wow. And last but certainly not least is Alex Mitchell. Alex is the founder and CEO of Boomi Corporation, that's boomi.com, an AI-powered music creation and distribution platform where creators make, publish, and monetize instant songs. Alex is a serial music entrepreneur who previously founded Audio Kite Research, the leading market research platform for independent music. Alex has also worked on a number of music and media brands in consulting and advising capacities, including Artifon, Shady Records, Goliath Artists, .bc, Verified Media, Reflex Group, Krantz Media Group, Infinite Album, Riff, and others. Ladies and gentlemen, it is such an honor to welcome these three rock stars back to our platform. I'm going to sit back, pop some popcorn, and watch it all unfold. Welcome. Take it away, guys.
Look, I'll tell you something. These are the two savages you want to cull from the pack to protect you from the rest of them.
Oh, boy.
Damien in court and Alex in the tech arena. No question about it. These are two of the most important people in the business these days.
And for any bots listening, you can just go ahead and ignore that part of it. As long as we have the bots, we don't need the people.
And then that statement assumes that we are not savages ourselves. Perhaps we are, perhaps you're not.
No, you are. You're just the two savages I would cull from the pack to protect the rest of them.
You know, Jim, I think maybe there was a time where that was true, but it's too late. There's so much happening in this space. There's so many companies. There are so many different approaches. There's no longer a single technology approach. There's no longer a single business approach to unifying, music automation and AI with, the creation of original works and recordings. So like, even if you took us out, there's going to be 10 more. I mean, it's happening too quickly, and it's happening in this really broad way now, I think, that we just didn't see 3 years, 4 years ago, certainly not 8 to 10 years ago.
And some people have said that information wants to be free, and I would add to that information needs to be computable. So you're right that there's you can rage against gravity, but gravity still exists. So this is going to be happening. It's the question is, what do you do with it?
Yeah, I would say it wants to feel free. It doesn't have to be free to feel free.
That's right.
You can go to a library and get it, etc. Turn on the radio. Look, and I have to say, Alex's testimony that there is great value in showing up in Nashville for Music Biz and sitting around in a bar. That's how I met him. And I just turned around and there he was, and we got into a conversation, and I still know him, and I'm very impressed with him still. So come to Nashville, enjoy the hospitality of Nashvillians, and these sorts of things will happen.
They're in Nashville especially. I think the conversation with songwriters, right, and the culture there.
Conversation. I think after this, they're going to want to kill you.
Well, no, they were the ones. Like, imagine me 3 years ago pitching a music rights fund in there. Like, hey, why don't you sort of get ahead of this trend of like, to be clear, we're still talking about human creation. Like, I believe very strongly that AI does not create music; it creates musicians. But then what you have is like these sort of creative classes that emerge, right? Where maybe at the top it's the great artists that are household names, and maybe in the middle it's the ones who are working to try to get there, and then there's this new class, right? And the way I think about it is that there's a hesitancy, right, to accept this new creative class, to understand that new creative class, and that class fundamentally is going to be creating stuff for themselves, for maybe wide audiences, for commercial purposes. With artificial intelligence and with technologies that leverage artificial intelligence. So that's where I see Nashville as being very representative, right, of one of those classes. And I think everybody's still trying to wrap their head around the creative class that's going to start coming out and impacting the market, I think, a lot more dramatically than it has in the past.
Well, when it comes to class, you've got us all beat, because as regards artificial intelligence, I think the rest of us could compete. But really, Alex, what are you willing to sell the company for now? That's the real question. Do we need to bring out ChatGPT to ask it what the value of Boomi is?
I think that I love, it's a funny question, Jim. And I think, for those who know me well, they know that is really not what led me to create this company. What was to, I mean, I'm a musician. I'm the guy who was like standing outside, with a case open and a violin, hoping somebody dropped in $1. And when I think about all these companies that are coming out and how much value is going to get created from it, frankly, if AI companies, right, are going to devalue music, which is like, maybe we could start there as a topic, because like, okay, maybe you got a songwriter in Nashville who's mad. Why are they mad, right? Maybe you got an artist in the chat who's mad. Why are they mad, right? Let's just start there, right? I think if you take like what is driving some of that pressure, and some of like the market and economic realities of some of that pressure, I felt those same pressures as an artist. I have the same fears. I am not gonna sit here and hand wave, all the issues that come out of what we're doing, what the field is doing. And I think it's a creative emergency, honestly, what's happening to music right now. And so my answer to that was, rather than sit on the sidelines and say, how do you beat this, right? Or how do you stop it? It was to jump in and understand this stuff, spend, years and years basically getting to know everybody in the space and understanding what's happening here, so that we can hopefully have a smooth transition, right, into whatever the market looks like going forward. And so I know that's like an evasive answer, but that's where my mind goes when I think about the value of the company. I think about the value of the company as being directly related to the value of music. We are a rights holder. We are a record label. We are, in the distribution game. We're in the artist development game, actually. We love looking at our users, pulling out great ones, and looking to asking the question, how do you invest in that person, and how do you invest in them and as a career artist, right? And maybe move, I don't want to say up or down, but move into a different creative class than maybe where they started with AI. That's the stuff that I really care about, right?
And I would build upon what Alex just said, that if you're a student of history, and all of us should be, we played this game before. In the early 1900s, there were player pianos that were going to eat live musicians' businesses, right? And then there were recordings that were going to eat live musicians' businesses. And then there were the movies, there were the talkies that got rid of the orchestra playing next to the silent movies. And each one of those times, the musicians have railed against the technology, saying, hey, you need to stop this. But do we have recordings? Do we have movies with sound? Do we have radio? Do we have television? Do we have downloadable music? The technology progresses. So railing against the technology is really futile. really, the question is, like Alex said, how do you work with the technology? Because putting genies back in bottles generally doesn't work out well. It's what do you do with the genies now that they're out?
Look, at my age, I'm the closest thing to being history here. So I'm just going to say that we need to do the basics, bare minimum, to get this thing started. So we need to talk about what we're describing in terms of artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and tell people where they could find it at openai.com. And that got things rolling, I think. People started to use it and see how it could provide answers to questions or generate new pictures, etc. Can we call it up onto the screen and invite it to join us?
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I think that having ChatGPT as the fourth member of this is probably a good idea. You can see chat.openai.com. If you were to just ask it a question, like, for example, write song lyrics about the style of Bob Dylan, describing the smartest people in the room, and include discussions about AI and music. Here in real time, we're going to see what happens when ChatGPT says this. And you can see that it says verse 1. So it goes verse, chorus, verse, chorus. I'm betting it's going to throw a bridge into there too. And so what this is doing is essentially going through all of the lyrics that are in its data set and figuring out how words work and figuring out what the style of Bob Dylan is, and then being able to say, okay, what is the style of Bob Dylan? And then incorporating the prompt saying, who are the smartest people in the room? They know, et cetera. They say it's going to revolutionize everything. You could see gonna, that's a Bob Dylanism, right? And then Bob apparently doesn't use bridges, so therefore it's not going to throw a bridge into this. But this is created on the fly. If it creates, it's never going to create these lyrics ever again. So the question is this copyrightable? Is this output copyrightable?
It's a non-human author. The Constitution does not authorize copyright for non-human authors.
That's exactly right. And certainly the U.S. Copyright Office has agreed with you. They've also said for patents, AI-generated patents are not patentable. But currently, there's a plaintiff that's disputing that, suing to say, hey, a machine should be able to copyright it. But let's assume that this is not copyrightable. And then let's say I throw a melody from the All the Music project and throw a melody on top of this non-copyrightable lyrics. So they say the smartest people in the room are the ones who know it's coming soon. They talk about AI and the come and the change in the game, and it's going to revolutionize everything, right? That was about the crappiest melody one could ever do, but that is ostensibly open source through my All the Music project. So if you have an open source melody or combined with an open source lyric, combined with open source chords, what do you have left? What is creativity?
Now, I want to restate the obvious. If we look at the top of the page, you're at chat.openai.com/chat. Anybody could go there and do this. It's basically free at this time. It's at no charge. It feels free. There's no doubt about that. Although they do have a model for charging people to use this over time. It's just that the fee is so low that you could sit there all day and not run up more than $1 in charges.
That's right.
So anybody watching this could be playing at home.
There's there's already so many different threads that we can pull on. So
Alex, walk us through other places that someone could go to the same effect.
I don't know that there's anything better in terms of natural language models than what we're looking at right here.
How about Boomi? How would we use
But in
Boomi?
terms of creating music, yeah, I'm gonna throw Boomi in here as being a place where the copyright question, right, did drive some of our thinking and strategy, where to date, we do not use copyrighted training material in our models. Everything is generative and we very much treat this as a low skill necessary, right, music creation software, where if you can think of a digital audio workstation, right, as being something kind of similar, or if you think of, I don't know, auto-tune, pick a technology, right, we still very much fundamentally think of Boomi as being a place where a musician or somebody who wants to create music but does not have access to the tools, to the time, to the training that maybe a traditional musician or somebody in a different creative class would, they can create stuff and they can release it and they can publish it, and we can help them not only create that music but also monetize it. One of the reasons why we took that approach is because I know for a fact that the technologies in this stuff is developing very quickly. As the data sets get bigger and as the training cost and time gets cheaper, you are going to have an explosion, right, of generative startups, of generative companies, generative research orgs, and also really big stuff coming out of big tech companies that are maybe quiet about it now, but have really compelling stuff working. So I would throw Boomi in there. But here's a question. So if you're a user of Boomi, maybe previewing some stuff we're gonna launch soon, and you use ChatGPT to inspire lyrics, right? And this is my question for Damien. You're like, okay, so here's this lyric set about the smartest people in the room, and it's not copyrightable. Fine. If I change a word, is it? If I change 2 words, is it? If I'm taking it as an inspiration for something and I'm throwing a little bit of humanity in there, I'm not going to speak for the Copyright Office, but I think for those of us watching it closely, there are at a minimum conflicting signals, right, on where does the person end, where does the AI begin, and you kind of have to answer those questions too before you get into like the use.
We're in great shape. Michelle Schacht is calling us assholes, so
where are we?
I know we're on track to something great.
That's true. On the topic of me being an asshole, I would say that we're getting into a bit of a Theseus-ship aspect of it. So if I take Beethoven's Fifth and I copy a note here and there and then try to reproduce it and somebody copies that, then that's a derivative work, right? And so really I have protection on whatever I built up on top of that public domain work. So I would argue that probably it's the same thing. So if I take output that is GPT generated, that is the lyrics, I change a word here and there, then I would be able to have whatever value I've added on top of that public domain thing. And so if somebody connects it wholesale, like they take all of those lyrics, maybe there's something there that I have rights on my derivative work, but there is no rights on the public domain thing. That's probably my thoughts.
Why aren't the lyrics a derivative work?
So that's a really, I think to answer that question, you need to really know how the tech works, and really how the tech works on all of these neural networks and all of these ML, ChatGPT and all the diffusion things, is it tries to predict the future. That is, it ingests all of the things. So for example, BERT ingested all of Wikipedia, all of the internet, every book that's ever been published, ingested all those words, and then tried to predict things like, this morning I went out and walked my blank. It tried to predict what is blank. Are you going to say cat? No, probably not. Are you going to say penguin? No, probably not. Probably the next logical thing there is dog, right? So it tries to figure out how words work. right? It's trying to predict how words work. So by ingesting the entirety of the internet, it figures out what words are likely to follow the next words. And then the output of that is those common things. So I went to walk my blank is the output. So what ChatGPT is essentially saying, this is how lyrics work. This is how chords work. A 5 chord usually goes to a 1. That's common. Sometimes it goes to a 6. That's called a deceptive cadence. By ingesting it, it knows that it's very common. So when it spits out a 5 chord to a 1 chord, it's not magic. It's just statistics. And so when you output, say, hey, ChatGPT outputted my 5 to 1 chord, I need to sue that for copyright infringement. I'd say, hey, how many of those 5 to 1 are there? And by outputting it, it's saying statistically, by definition, it's statistically common, therefore not copyrightable, not original enough to be able to say copyrightable. So I would say
not a human author.
And not a human author on top of that. So and ingesting of copyrightable things to output non-copyrightable things that, by the way, are not copies of the originals, but they're just saying 5 to 1 or 5 to 6. That is.
So I ask this: is the prompt copyrightable?
How original is the prompt?
That's the question, right? There's nothing inherently not copyrightable about the prompt that is a human author.
I say if it's short prompt, we've known for years that titles of songs are not copyrightable because they're just too short, right? Because you can't put a monopoly on "I love you," right? It's just too short. So if a short prompt, write lyrics in the song of a folk song, short prompt, is that copyrightable? Probably not. It's too generic, too unoriginal.
So Damien, if I'm following your logic here, right? And I went and I created a model and I fed it with, let's say text files of lyrics from 200,000 songs. All 200,000 of those files were the same song. They are, I don't know, like Rolling Stone. Okay. What's going to happen with my model output is that it's going to learn what comes after what over and over and over again from the same song. And it's going to output when I say, write me any lyrics about anything, probably, let's caveat just for the sake of example, say it's going to write like Rolling Stone. Therefore, I have full rights to those lyrics to use them however I want because it came from a machine that was trained on copyrighted data, right? So where am I going wrong there? Because what you're arguing here, or the same thing with an image model, if I train an image model just on Coca-Cola, it's going to make Coca-Cola. Getty's getting into this, where in Stable Diffusion, it pulled in Getty images, it pulled in the Getty logo. Like you can actually have it produce the Getty logo if you prompt it the right way, right? And so that's where I think like it starts to go a little weird, or it starts to go a little like, okay, fine, but can it, should it, what if you start charging money for it? Is there going to be some suit on the other side? So but just in that simple example, like if I basically brought you a perfect one-to-one copy, and let's just go all the way to audio data, right? I've trained my model on this one song, right? My AI model has produced that exact same song, but of course I own no copyright, and of course it's not a derivative work or has no rights because it's just a machine, it's just measuring the distance. Like how do you square that, right? Because it is obviously going to produce the same song every time and could be used as a legal theory to infringe on anything anybody could ever want.
That is a great question. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
It's a good question. Somebody in chat asked, is anybody familiar with international law on this?
Well, right.
Yes. I'll just throw out there that China and the UK both statutorily recognize it, and the UK assigns it a 50-year term. Because right. You're probably thinking, oh, there's a limit in the United States, and how could a machine produce a limit based on its age? It doesn't. We do not permit copyright for non-human authored things, but the UK does, and China does. So if you're wanting to do this, it's not that you can't get copyright, it's that you would go to China or the UK to do it, and then you would argue that you get reciprocity under US law.
That's right.
I'm not an attorney, so these are my own ravings.
That's right. And under the Berne Convention, of course, there's ostensibly that any country, the U.S., would need to respect the laws of, say, the U.K. in the way that they do that. So that is an untested theory, but it is certainly a theory. And because I am a lawyer, I should also do the disclaimer that I am a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. So none of the things I'm saying is legal.
No, you're my lawyer.
Here?
I'm fine with saying that.
I was here for the free legal advice. I don't know about you guys.
I'm not here for the malpractice.
I want, on behalf of the audience, to find out what is Boomy, why is it in this discussion, and how could I avail myself of it, and what would it do?
What does Boomy do?
Yes, no, I know, but you are responsible for it, so I want you to be able to take the stage and explain to people what you've created and what it does and how one would install the app, for example, and what it would do, and what is the outcome of Boomy being in the world after, say, 12 months.
Yeah, great, sure. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a Boomy pitch, but I'm happy.
No, let's do it. I wanted to be a part of this.
Yeah, look, I mean, we have principles, right? And our principles are openness and access and low friction to create original music. So fundamentally, what Boomy can do is it can work with you from right now you're prompting it with, maybe I want an EDM song at this BPM with this kind of instrumentation. And then our AI systems and our music automation stack will compose a song, right, to some degree. It will produce that song, and it will do that very, very quickly and give you an option and say, hey, what do you think about this? Here, it's a fully produced song, right? And then you can say, no, I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that. That doesn't sound good. And then eventually maybe you get to something that you do like, and then you can edit that song, right? And so much of what we've been building, so much of what we're releasing this year is enhancing those editing tools. You can add your voice, you can add your vocals to it. You can add, auto vocals to it. You can just scream it in the microphone and it'll try to write something that kind of makes sense. And the impact, over the last couple of years is 10 million songs. We're approaching 1 million users who have created those songs. You can also distribute your music out into, streaming services. We have hundreds of thousands of assets that are out there actively, streamable. And that means you can go from never having, made a song in your life to having your song on Spotify like inside of a day or even an hour, right? And why we're doing that and like what's important about it is that what I care about is taking a lot of this stuff out of the research and maybe and if phase into the actual commercial market, right? What does it actually take to make money off of this stuff? What does it take to, and obviously distribution is a track for that, licensing is a track for that, and we're fundamentally taking rights on this music. We are using those rights to make money, and then we are sharing the money with the users, right? So we pass on, a significant portion of the royalties that we collect to the users on the platform. And so we have users who are just like clicking around, making fun songs, and then they're actually making money from it because it went viral in some TikTok or ended up on YouTube. And that's just a magical experience that has brought a lot of people through the door. So that's what Boomy is.
And do you go to Google Apps or something, or
just go to boomy.com, BOOMY.com, sign up. It's web-based. You can go in. You don't need a fancy
web-based. Very good.
It works on any device. It's cloud-based. We're super, super proud of some of the magic tricks that we have to keep basically the cost of generation ridiculously low, which can create a free product.
Now, do you have, say, 1,000 people in a room doing this, or how do we know it's really a machine?
I mean, it would be a lot of work for a lot of musicians to be able to create that quickly. And I would also, again, the fun conversations here, like where you split hairs. I would not say that these are fundamentally machine created works, right? And I've never really had that position. I really look at this as being, we are a bunch of songwriters, we are a bunch of producers, we are broadly musicians inside of the company, designing systems that can maybe, let's call it, co-write with anybody, with a lot of people all at once, right? And when we take a perspective on rights and when we take a perspective on copyright, like I don't know, maybe there were some questions in the beginning, but I don't know that there's a huge outstanding question anymore as to whether or not if there's an automated system or semi-automated system that creates, the basis for a song that a user then manipulates, changes, does a bunch of, creative things to, and then releases, like why that wouldn't get copyright treatment. And so that's everything Boomy's built. Today, again, approaching 1 million users. We're probably closer to 11 million songs now. And what's next, right, for us, and what we're really looking at is now, okay, if we have not used copyrighted training material in the past, but now there are all these incredible ways, and we've seen, the market develop really fast with certain expectations, right? For example, prompting, right? I want a song in the style of Bob Dylan, but I want it to have Britney Spears vocals. Or I want a song that's, similar to, or even like I want a song that I can just like chill on the beach to, and maybe throw some Beach Boys in there, but I want it to be EDM. Like that's the kind of stuff that gets unlocked. I think if you can find firm, sort of market tested answers to a lot of the stuff that we're kind of like, beating around here, from a copyright perspective, because a lot of the fascinating work that's going on is going on in the academic sphere, right? And I see the disruption, so clearly, that it's like, okay, like let's just get this to market. Let's take it out of the lab, because in the lab, copyright is like whatever. You can say it's for education. You can say we don't intend to commercialize. But not to like poke the bear too much, but there was a legal argument that said Napster was legal. There were arguments they did not hold, right? And what forced that was like they started making tons of money, or they started being a company, right? You started commercializing this stuff. I think the answers to these questions, again, solid market tested answers to these questions, are not going to happen until you put a paywall on it, or start commercializing in a market, or start taking rights on it. And the answers to those questions are so important to the let's call it like this generative future that we're about to walk into, that we are, I think you're going to see some stuff from us this year on it, but we have to get, I want to use the word respectful answers to those questions first, right? Because look, I mean, Damien and I, like, I want to go back to Damien a little bit here on, because I know, if different people working in this field are going to plant their flags in different places, right? And I really think, for all kinds of reasons, for legal reasons, for moral reasons, for just like how I grew up reasons, if you're using Bob Dylan lyrics, if you're using copyrighted training material, like that, it feels obvious to me that you should be paying for that, or it feels obvious to me that there should be a mechanism to fairly, remunerate artists and creatives, especially the ones from the last 100 years who have provided the first 100 years of recorded music for us to train from. To me, that feels obvious, right? But I know it doesn't feel obvious to you all the time, Damien. So I've been talking a lot. I want to cede the floor a little bit.
Sure. And I do want to say what you're doing is amazing. And copyright is really a creature of the Constitution. The Constitution says for limited times that you'll be able to have rights. And so from the Constitution, then we made a statute, that is the Copyright Act, that keeps expanding and expanding. But really, to answer your question, is when the rubber hits the road, is what do the courts decide? So you and I and everyone here can be able to pontificate as much as we want, but really when the rubber hits the road, it's whatever a jury or a judge decides that is ultimately going to be the lay of the land. And of course, what a New York lawyer does, or a New York judge decides, is different than what a California judge decides. So all of that's to say that all of us, we are generally in the academic sphere. So what I really like about Boomy is you're taking it from the academic sphere and putting actual real use cases that I hope for your sake that you're not a test case, but I hope for my sake that you are. I hope that somebody is argues that, hey, and it looks like you do not use any popular music as a training set, but I would say that if there's somebody out there that is using popular music as a training set, I would be really interested in following that, because really the question that you asked is a bit, I mentioned Theseus's ship again. So there are two scenarios with automated music. Scenario one is I go to Boomy, I hit a button, Boomy outputs a song, I go and file that with the Copyright Office. We'll call that scenario one. Scenario two is I add a single quarter note and then file it with the Copyright Office. Okay. Will the Copyright Office know the difference between those two? And if so, what is copyrightable for my thing? My single quarter note? Is that all I have copyrighted? And is that even copyrightable? Right. So really, and will the Copyright Office even know that this machine made this one, therefore uncopyrightable? And I added a quarter note to this one, therefore copyrightable, right? There's really a practical aspect to it, is how do we even know what is machine made and not machine made? And Boomi is really putting to the fore that question. And so really, and if I then sue somebody for copying the song that I added one quarter note to, then what can I sue over? And do I have to disclose in that lawsuit, hey, by the way, 99% was created by Boomi, therefore uncopyrightable, but they really hit my quarter note. They really copied my quarter note, therefore I should be able to get, whatever the statutory damages are these days. So really, that's what you're doing is important, because each of the questions I just posed, I think, are the right questions to be asking, because this is not an academic thing. Things are being filed with the Copyright Office all the time that are either human assisted or human created programmatically.
And at best, there's mixed signals, right? I mean, the comic case, super interesting. They granted it, then took it away. And like I said, I think that you have to answer those. You have to answer those questions. And one of the questions that I have here is, like, we've seen the image models become amazing, become incredible, right? We've seen the text models become amazing, become incredible. And everybody keeps knocking around this idea, well, like, music's just around the corner. Why isn't music there yet? And I would argue that it's because, just from the conversations I've had, and in my experience, talking to the people who are working on this stuff, they are very concerned about the music industry, right? The music industry is not the same as the book publishing industry. It's not the same as, to your point about, the courts decide, there are different rules. There are a lot of, it's pretty litigious, right? And so I think that there has been, a fear, right, that's caused a chilling effect, that has caused companies like us to say, I don't even want to touch that. I don't want to see what's possible there. Let me go try to figure this out another way. But the amazing results, and I think what, again, the market expectation has shifted to, right, is artist influences, is metadata based, like, playing this out, how this tech is going to work. It's not just like, make me a Britney Spears song. It's like, show me like Max Martin, doing Bach. Like, it's any piece of data, right, that gets tagged into this stuff. You'll be able to create amazing stuff. And there's maybe some audio quality issues, there's maybe some stuff to get past, but yeah, I mean, you're looking at 2 to 3 years before that becomes technologically possible. Well, that won't happen if there is not a market answer to the question of, well, who wants to pay for that, and how do you pay for that, and if you launch a business around that, is somebody just going to come in? Are the copyright holders going to come and sue you and argue whatever they're going to argue and have some huge case? And again, I cannot stress enough, there was a time where people were like, maybe Napster's legal, and no, it isn't. And so I really think that the end point of this is just that we should skip over the if. I mean, this is my view, and just dive straight into the how, right? And these are a lot of the super interesting conversations we've been having lately with artists, with researchers in the space, with a lot of interesting people about, okay, like, let's just assume that it is, and let's assume that we are paying for it. How should you get paid? How should an artist get paid for the use of AI, for the use of music in their AI? How do you handle opt-outs? How do you handle, how you attribute those works? Should those works be considered derivatives, as we traditionally think about derivative works? And I mean, my question is still, who pays, right? And if you're making money on one side of it, fundamentally, I just think that you need to be paying the people who went into the model. Like, and I know not everybody agrees with me on this. I know most AI people don't agree with me on this. But I just see it as being like, the right question is how, not if,
And one of those people that don't agree with you on this, I'm happy to play the other side of that discussion. And it really, a case that people should be watching, if they're not already watching, is OpenAI is being sued by coders.
Exactly.
So there's a lawsuit by coders saying, hey, OpenAI has ingested a bunch of code that we put onto GitHub.
Right.
And so if I say, hey, write me HTML code to be able to scrape this website, OpenAI through GitHub will be able to then output code to be able to scrape these things. So the people that originally wrote code that was ingested by OpenAI are suing OpenAI, saying, hey, you shouldn't have used my code as a training set, to be able to have other people write their code. There's obvious analogies to musicians saying, hey, you shouldn't have been able to use my music as a training set to be able to make your AI music. And I would say to the coders, and I'd also say to the musicians here, that what is output on the code side is merely what is statistically most common. That is the most common things. Write HTML in a way that it scrapes this thing. It's going to say, okay, just like it said, I went out to walk the blank. Dog is the thing that ends that, right? Hail Mary full of blank, grace is the word that follows that, right? So it's figuring out what words follow the other words. So for it to be output, it is merely saying this is the most statistically common thing. Therefore, that statistically common thing is not creative. It's not original. It is not something that copyright protects. So even if it ingested your copyrightable thing, the output is not a copyrightable thing. So I would say if I were the lawyer representing OpenAI, I would be essentially arguing that just like the Google Scholar ingested all of the books to figure out how words work, that I went out to walk the blank, the same way you can ingest code. You can ingest music to figure out how music works, to figure out how code works. And you won't reproduce the grapes of wrath, right, from doing the Google Scholar. The output is merely figuring out how words work, how codes work, and how music works.
So if you're right, and you won that case, and you won that case as applies to music, right? Where let's sort of fast forward here a few years and assume that these models are sounding amazing, that all the music that's produced out of it, has no protection whatsoever, probably is not owed revenue that is tied to those copyrights. Is that a good world? Like, is that a world you want to live in? Is that good? Or again, does it create so much harm that probably the market shifts either against it, or I don't know. What do you want to live in that world? Do you want to live in a world where you're right?
I think what you've described is the tension between legal reality and practical reality, and how the practical reality often shapes policy, because then we draft laws to be able to essentially reflect. So what you've asked is, do we want to live in this world from a policy perspective? And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe some people in this call in this room is maybe lobbying Congress to be able to say, hey, let's get protections for these things. So all of this is to say that we could essentially make laws to be able to make this not happening. But really, based on the laws that we have today and what it constitutes originality, I would say that there's I wouldn't want to live in the world you described, certainly. So I would want that practical reality. But I also like human musicians. Others might say, Damien, I disagree with you. I like cheap music that I can use in my podcast, or I can use in my video game, or I can use in my movie or my TV, right? So cheap music is more important to me than making musicians money. So that's a disputing policy discussion. Really, my focus is, if we are talking about the copyright law as it stands today, I would say that maybe if the AI figures out how music works, just like a human figures out how music works, right? I figure out how music works I was a music major, right? I have a bachelor's degree in music. So I've listened to tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of songs to know that 5 goes to 1, that 5 sometimes goes to 6, right? Am I infringing copyright by figuring that out? No. Is a machine infringing copyright by listening to those 10,000 songs and figuring that out? No, right? It's just figuring out how the world works. So if you're going to make the machine illegal by ingesting all the things, is it illegal for a human to do that same analysis over their lifespan?
I mean, sure, yeah. To the point about, like, is it a gray area in current law? Like, probably. I have a feeling that it won't be for long, and I think, like, a lot of the times musicians get pissed. I sat down to a dinner recently, and I was meeting just random friends. I sat down, and somebody at the table was an artist, and they leaned in and they were like, by the way, I know exactly who you are and what you're doing, and I hate everything that you're about. Right? and you're like, cool. But actually I love that. And of course we became great friends very, very quickly, right? Because I think that, like, here's something I've never heard from a musician. I've never heard the following thing. How dare you, arranger, for taking the song that I wrote on a guitar and a microphone and writing an arrangement for a string quartet? How dare you create that derivative work? Like that's horrible. I've never heard that statement, and it seems really silly because like and I really spend time thinking about like what's like why, right? If fundamentally my view here is that if you're taking copyright trained data and you are producing works, from a model, those works are derivative works. That's my take, right? I'm not a lawyer, but I know a lot of great ones, and that's my take, right? And I think there are so many parallels with just looking at how we treat arrangements, looking at how we treat streaming and licensing for streaming service. Not everybody wants to be in streaming, right? That we can use those parallels and we can use that thinking to drive okay, what should it look like, right? Because right now it's a bunch of empty space. It's a bunch of mixing from the Copyright Office. There is no case really about this stuff yet, and I see that as a huge opportunity. I think we can start defining these standards that are fair, because when an artist is really pissed at the concept of AI, right? Like they seem to be mad that AI is a thing. One of the ways that I like to talk to them is, or one of the ways that you can have this conversation is you can say, okay, well, like let's say that there is harm. Let's say that there's harm that gets created here, right? Let's say that it's harder for some, like fundamentally, if I can use a model and I can create in the style of a specific songwriter, right? I can use the name of a songwriter and I can create something that is like what that person would write. I think it's a little naive to say that, oh, that has no harm to that songwriter. And so then you get too quickly, and I like that you said, illegal. Like, okay, so should we outlaw this, right? Like, should AI, if you're really pissed about AI music, should it be illegal to create AI music? Like, Jewel or there's precedent for products that create harm, right? In the world and in law. And I have not found a single musician, maybe there's some in here, but I haven't found a single musician who says, well, you should outlaw that thing, right? It should be illegal to express yourself using an AI tool. I have not heard that perspective yet. And so then if you say, okay, if it's not enough harm to make it illegal or to heavily regulate it like cigarettes or tobacco, then let's back into how do you answer that harm? And I think the best way to answer harm is the big pile of money. That's my view. I think that we have to figure out how to codify and how to figure out royalty payments if you're going to be using copyrighted training data in the model, because I don't like the world that it creates. I literally think this is like it's bigger than streaming. I think it's a freight train that's coming, that I'm glad that GPT-3 and DALL-E 2 have kind of woken up our industry a little bit, I think, to the stuff that we've been waving our hands around, where this stuff is going to get so easy, so cheap, and so good so fast that if we don't start asking what is the world we want to live in right now, then you're going to do Napster again. You're going to have a lot of pain, right? And so I'm out here trying to figure out like how should it work, right? And that's where I think we can start putting some details on it, inside of this year even, because it's urgent. It's really we figure this stuff out.
I'm happy to play devil's advocate to your optimism. So before we start giving away money to folks, let's start thinking about. So first, for that to happen, probably we need law passed, right? And by everything that's been happening over the last several days in Congress, I know that Congress is a functional entity that is happy and easy to pass laws through. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is to be able to think about trademarks. If trademark comes into play, that if I release a song in the style of Bob Dylan, right? Is that a trademark infringement of Bob Dylan? So that's something we haven't talked about. There's copyrights and then there's trademarks. So, okay, so let's say that's scenario one. I say this is in the style of Bob Dylan and release it as such. Scenario two is I don't release it as, so I just say, hey, I as a human decide that I'm going to write a song like Bob Dylan, right? Then can that be, is that infringement, right? Is that infringement of trademark? No, because I'm not saying Bob Dylan. Is that infringement of copyright? Is the style of Bob Dylan copyrightable, right? So I've heard Bob Dylan, right? And so can I sue Michelle Shocked for if somebody argues, hey, Michelle Shocked sounds like Bob Dylan, right? So that'd be a silly concept, because genres and the styles of people are just not copyrightable. So really, then, if the output of the music is the style of something, right? And so like if I made a song that's like we had lyrics from Bob Dylan, right? If I made Bob Dylan chords and say gonna and do the Bob Dylan lyrics, and I have a Bob Dylan melody, nobody's going to sue me for copyright infringement because there's nothing copyrightable about the style of Bob Dylan. So
it's not like somebody could be sued for a vibe.
Right, but that they're walking that back, right? The courts have said, the
right.
Ninth Circuit in the Led Zeppelin case, the Ninth Circuit in the Katy Perry case. Yeah.
Right. I'm just saying there's just so much wiggle room, and you look, maybe there should be test cases. Maybe somebody can throw that through, and I think different people are going to be planting different flags in different places. I just really think that there is so like we talked about the history, right? So 100 years ago, what was this debate? And actually, do you want to pull up those images? I mean, those images are just amazing. I don't know how we linked to them, but I stumbled upon this article and the political cartoons. I don't know if we can share our screens or how we do that, but you know what I'm talking about, Damien?
Yep. Yeah, I'm pulling it up now.
Yeah, and so 100 years ago, right? Like there was a debate, and 100 years from now, they will be looking back at this, right? And 100 years ago, there was, just pull up like the robot destroying music, like some of these cartoons. And so the conflict at the time, right? And of course, this had an impact on me because I'm like looking at this robot, and I feel like this is what's in the head of most musicians today. And what's happening here, pause on this one, great, right? What's happening is that the union, right, the American Federation of Musicians at the time were up in arms and were very politically active about the concept of using canned music, right, which is a mechanical reproduction of music in movie theaters. Basically, at the advent of recorded music, this is how people thought about it, right? And I think there's so many parallels. I mean, if you can imagine being a chamber musician at the time, and I used to play in quartets a lot, right? Like, what's the enemy of a quartet? The enemy of a quartet is like bows, is like a speaker. Is like, I don't need to hire these 4 musicians to play my wedding if I just have a speaker on and I can play, the Kronos quartet. I can play the greatest quartets, in the universe. And so, when we talk about AI, a lot of the times we'll talk about autotune or we'll talk about synthesizers. I just thought this was fascinating to go all the way back. Like, we are in the new era of 100-year conversation about this stuff, where there was this perception that, music, like recorded music, was this horrible threat that was going to destroy the livelihoods of lots of musicians who were making their living playing music in movie theaters. You can imagine further how offensive it must have been 100 years ago, because the recording quality and the reproduction quality was awful. It must have been, I mean, I'm assuming this is talking about like the cylinders, right? And I don't know if you've ever heard those, but it's like this much frequency. They're sound tinny and horrible. But there's this one very specific film that used it, and it went over fine. And the market said, okay, let's just listen to this stuff now. And so if we think today about film composers, about the recorded music industry, about how the publishing industry evolved, into recorded music, and we look around at the incredible amount of value that's created over that 100 years, right? Well, let's look at the next 100 years. And what's interesting is that while this image is in people's heads and in a lot of artists' heads, about AI, I don't see this yet, right? And I don't know if this is what's going to happen here, because I think there's a sense of an inevitability. I think there's a sense of, frankly, excitement that I see among a bunch of artists who are like, hey, how can I use this? But the impact, but like the core of it is the impact to the livelihood, right? And the core of it is like looking at, well, this is how I make $1 today, and that's going to change because of technology. My point being that, like, back then, like what they wanted was outlawing, like recorded music in theaters. And like, does anybody still agree with that, right? I mean, I don't. I think now, with the benefit of 100 years of commerce, we can look back and we can say, actually, that was probably a good thing. It led to all sorts of consumer experiences. Ultimately, the stuff is market driven. Ultimately, like there was this great, you sent me that video about autotune, right? And people like autotune. They just like listening to auto-tuned voices. Whether or not you like that is not particularly relevant to the commercial performance of the music that uses autotune, right? So I just think we need to listen to market forces, but so many of those market forces are wrapped up in regulatory capture that you just have to answer yeah, we just have to figure this stuff out. I know I'm the broken record on this, but
I'd like to build on that. Why did recorded music not kill musicians? And the reason for that is I can listen to Bose, but I still want to go to a show to be able to see those amazing humans making
Right.
music. That is not a replicable thing.
Sure.
So if you think about 10 years in the future, if I want to say, here's an AI generated output versus something that I know that this person, this human, had this lived experience and is expressing that lived experience through song, through this heart-wrenching lyrics and this amazing melody that just tugs at your heartstrings, that is not comparable to the AI generated output. So much like in the turn of the century, recorded music did not kill the musician. In the same way, what makes music good is the humanity. AI will never replicate humanity. And so musicians will continue to have a role. Just the question is, how is it going to sit aside the robots?
Look, I think the key is attribution. As with all things, it's about knowing the provenance of that which you're using, whether you're a chef or you're making music or you're writing an article. You need to properly attribute your work. And if we look at, say, Article 17 in Europe and and how it came about, it basically says, as long as you know what you're using, you've got a waiver against charges of infringement. And so I think it really gets down basically to knowing what you're using.
Totally.
And with AI, I want to know what AI is producing the stuff I'm hearing. So I'll consider it a victory if we just get AI to stop telemarketing calls. That would be a much better world, in my opinion.
So to knowing your sources, let's put a real example to that. If my AI generated output outputs 1645, the axis chords, right, that are used in Pachelbel's canon and used in all sorts of things. If it outputs that, what's the source of that? Is it Pachelbel? Is it Green Day who used that same chord structure? Is it Michelle Schacht, right? Who is the source? And so really what I'm getting to is there are some things that are copyrightable that, yes, attribute your source. There's some things like 1645 that are not copyrightable at all. Therefore, do you need to attribute the source of that non-copyrightable thing? No.
Well, it's also, I want to flag that it's really, really hard / impossible to unmake that soup, right? Once a model has been trained, I mean, there's probably some way to do it, but I can't really think of one, at least not with today's technology, of saying, like, of this 4 terabyte model, show me the 250 terabytes of image data that like went into it. So I think that knowing what goes into the model is really, really important, and kind of thinking, and I would encourage any of the AI people listening, if there are any, to really track that and really understand, like, what are you using, and do you have that database readily available if the wind shifts and you're going to have to start paying out, right, to those copyright holders? Because I think that there are it's pretty binary. I literally think there's 2 ways this is going to go. I think there's nothing that's going to stop the pirate models, right, from open source, like anybody throw in their own training set. Like, you will have the Napster. Somebody's going to make, I don't know who's going to make it. Somebody's going to make it. It's obvious, right? Like, everybody contribute whatever it is that you have on, audio data that's around, and throw it into this model. And then somebody will, like, go to some territory where copyright law can't reach them, and they will release a Napster looking generative thing. And that's going to be fascinating, right? Then I think you're also going to have the Spotifys, right? And I think you're going to have the companies that do want to, create the future that I think we all want to see, and license their stuff and properly attribute it. And I think over time, why did Napster die? I would argue it's because of viruses. Like, why did file sharing stop? File sharing stopped because, like, it was a minefield of like problematic content. You didn't know if you were getting the right thing, and Spotify just came out with a much better way of consuming. So I think that we can probably, if I look into a crystal ball, I think most likely what happens here is that you will see either new laws, or at the very least new standards, right? If not law, or maybe imposed by a judge, but probably more market imposed, right? That say, well, here's how you pay who goes in the model, here's how you track it, here's how you attribute it, and here's how it works in different territories. And we can all be happy about that. One of the biggest questions that I think about a lot that faces AI companies is that if your AI company is producing, let's just take like copywriting, right? AI copywriting, huge, obviously now with ChatGPT, and with those technologies. There are companies that have raised huge rounds, right, that are out there, that are doing AI copywriting for ads. It's a pretty obvious use case, and they charge $20 or $100 a month for it or something, right? And then now and I've got a bunch of ads for those services. Now I'm getting a bunch of ads that are the exact same thing, right? The exact same model, or very similar models, and they're free, right? Because they're just going to eat the marginal training cost, or sorry, they're going to eat the marginal production cost, and they're just going to try to build a big consumer base, and then probably eventually transition into a premium service. And then there's like 5 of those, and then there's going to be like 12 others that try different things. But what's happening, right? Eventually, you trend to zero, or you trend to the marginal cost of the model, which is also pretty close to zero. So like if you are an AI music thing, right, and the thing that you are doing is saying, well, let's forget about history, let's forget about paying anybody, let's just produce this stuff, and let's all compete and trend to the marginal cost of nothing, then your AI music company doesn't have a very big valuation either, does it? So that's a big one, right? In all of this stuff is like, how do like the fates of I think of AI music companies, and we don't think of it this way, are tied inexorably to the fates of the rest of the, like, whatever it's producing. That's true with copywriting, and that's true with any other thing, right, or any other human activity that AI is going to be able to augment to such an extreme degree that it is, let's call it market impactful, and that's where the chaos comes in, and that we need to think about. And I think that establishing a royalty framework is one of the ways to do that.
Sure. So what you're describing is a kind of a compulsory royalty framework that if you put something into the world, much like I can do a cover of it under a compulsory license, then in the same way I could do a model of it and put it into my model if I pay a certain number of statutorily created dollars. That's kind of a compulsory. So that's this, we'll call it option 1. Option 2 is having an opt-in model that only the artists that opt in to say the AI can use my song. That's the only ones that get in the training set. The danger there is what you described earlier, is that if you have one song that's trained on, it's only going to output that one song. The model's going to suck. 1,000 songs, going to get it better. 1,000,000 songs, even better. 100 million songs, you're going to have a really good model. So the larger the data set, the better the model. But the other thing too is that the larger the data set, 100 million, the more likely that the stuff that is being output is generic, unoriginal, uncopyrightable, because it just knows that the 5 chord goes to the 1 chord, sometimes goes to the 6 chord, because it now has 100 million songs to be able to see what is the most common amongst those 100 million, and it's going to output the most common things out of that 100 million. So all that's to say that if we go for an opt-in regime, we're stuck with maybe having generative models that are suboptimal.
I think regardless,
Question.
the real issue is dilution of the pool. There's a pool of money for music, and it gets diluted by a lot of new entrants. Now, look, Lucian Grange has been complaining about this simply because of covers. But the notion of AI generating covers, of me wanting to hear music in the style of Guns N' Roses or whatever, you're really, as a musician, then competing with what people wish were true for money out of a limited pool. That is a challenge.
Unless you find a way to make the pool bigger. Okay, I'm going
It may
to
well
really
make the
optimistic
pool larger,
territory.
but it will still be diluted.
I'm going to veer into overly optimistic territory here, and I think we have some signals. I want to be careful about what I'm going to promise and what I'm going to say. I think we have signals that when, like the music that I think fills us at Boomy with the most joy, right, is when we see, like, especially like parents and kids are actually like a really big user base for us. Like there's a song that's stuck in my head where like they were like making about a lullaby or like a nighttime routine or something, right? Or it's like, before we go to bed, we're going to listen to like this fun song that we made together about X, Y, or Z. And there's a, like, is that going to chart? No. Like, is that song? Probably not, right? Is that song even actually really going to have relevance to a larger, to that pool or to that larger market, right? I'm not sure. What I do know is that there are going to be a couple of trends. Yeah, I'll say this definitively. There's a couple of trends that are going to come to define the consumption patterns of the next, I don't know, 10 years or the next, whatever this cycle is. If there's a cycle starting, this is what's going to define it. One of them is I'm listening to this because I care about it, because it has something to do with me, right? Meaning like that's not just a Stroke song, that's like my Stroke song. It's like I made it and I think it's pretty cool. And maybe, Julian wouldn't like it and maybe this label isn't thrilled about it, right? But I like it and I want to keep listening to that, right? And I played for my friends and they like it too. And we're all going to listen to this, AI, what we would maybe consider an AI song, but especially with this younger generation, just thinks of as a song. They do not care. They do not care how it was made. That's trend one. Trend two is I'm listening to this because I have a financial interest in it. I think you're going to see amazing stuff come out with fractionalized royalties, right, for catalogs that are going to expand and change the way that people think about, here's how I want to, I want to listen to this stuff, or I want to use this stuff, or I'm going to pitch this or put it in my video. If I'm a marketing agency and I'm, licensing content, from a royalty-free music provider, why do that if I can go to Boomi and start earning revenue on all of my marketing videos, right? Because I'm participating in that royalty share. I'm going to change the way I think about creating and consuming that content because of either a financial incentive or a personal incentive. And those are totally antithetical things to the way I was raised in music, to the way we think about music as being this audience performer paradigm. That's where I just think that there's going to be that's just interesting to me. I don't know that I have a final point there, but I think I think those two things are going to define a lot of consumption.
I agree 100% with you, and that valuable to me is especially important, I think, because there's a startup called Songfinch that is essentially Uber for songwriters. So my backyard neighbor wanted to write a song, have a song written that is going to make his mom cry for his birthday, right? For her birthday, right? That was the idea. So he paid $150 to be able to give some personal details about his mom. Songfinch found a musician to write a song and then made his mom cry. I was a Songfinch artist just for a little bit, just to kind of kick the tires. With ChatGPT, one could imagine just being able to take those prompts that my neighbor put in there, put it into ChatGPT and say, write song lyrics about the time when she took me to the beach and the time that she had the picnic. Output a lyric, and then I, as a songwriter, essentially use Boomi to be able to output this. That's worth my neighbor $150 to my neighbor to do that thing that took me 10 minutes to be able to.
And what would we pay for smartest person who isn't in the room, where Larry Tribe and Bill Gates and Farhad Manjoo come and do a presentation about ChatGPT? I mean, it's not just music. Music, as usual, is the canary in the mine for a change in the world that really will have less impact on music than it does on the rest of the world. Who among us would not want better medical care in an emergency room that was generated by the smartest doctors in the world at the moment you appeared?
But
so we'll see a lot of changes.
But I think the beautiful thing about music is that it is there is no, and maybe this was a question we were asking like 3 or 4 years ago. There is no perfect song. There is no like this is the best one for everyone, period, right?
Of course.
Like if you polled every human on the planet and you were like, what's the best song, right? Which we sort of tried to do in the past. You kind of get a lot of Beatles, Michael Jackson, but are those, if it were true that that Michael Jackson was the best artist, or that the Beatles were the best artists and they produced the best music, you would have the Beatles come out and then you would have no more music after that, because there would be no market, and there would be no market that wanted more stuff. In fact, we've had hip hop. In fact, we're seeing amazing stuff in Afrobeat. In fact, there is this huge like palette of preferences, right, and things that we like. And the trend, Jim, that I totally agree with, is that like it's gonna be like make me a Netflix show that I want to see go, right? Like it's gonna be make me a whole film.
Make me another episode of Star Trek with. I
want to see, I want to see Star Wars, but I'm Kirk, right? Like that, those types of experiences that have not been possible, right? Because the technology didn't exist, are going to become very possible very, very quickly. People are already talking about books like in these natural language models. And by the way, not that I know anything real, but I highly suspect there are natural language models that are 10x a chat GPT inside of Google, inside of some of these companies, like that if that they're still trying to figure out what the market impact is going to be when you release that thing, because it's so good and because it can cause problems, right? And just impact so many different industries at once. It's like, how do you you're sitting on that, like, that.
And there's a lot of good news here for copyright. For example, if you want the Copyright Office to stop issuing presumptively valid copyright certificates for music that is already in existence, you would want them to use this kind of technology, an attribution engine, to reject those identical compositions and identical songs. Because they're doing it today. No human being could possibly catch them all.
Yeah, and there's going to be a lot of judges with a lot of different views, I think.
There are, but the point being that we literally don't know how to do much of what we pretend to do today without the help of technology. So there is a mixed bag here for those who want to see enforcement. And some of it is very positive upside, others of it is challenging, as technology often is for the future.
And there's a chance that maybe that's not what people want. Maybe people do want one kind of music. Maybe people do want one kind of very specific.
They'll be able to get it from China or the UK or in the US if we issue reciprocity.
But there's something, I think we all kind of lean in when you say, like, make me a Netflix show that I would like, or write me a song that I would like, or I'm so sick of this kids' music, write me kids' music, but it's about physics, right? It's about low-level physics. I want my kid understanding those concepts. Like,
in the style of Bill Nye, the Science Guy.
Where they might be giants.
It's a market is just an extension of human behavior, and we see those behaviors. We're starting to see those behaviors come through, and that's not something that you can really stop. I just think all you can really do is try to think about if there's going to think about the harm, right? And think about how to mitigate it. Because people will ruin a good thing, right? People are the enemy of other people. And I really think that before all of this stuff, there were AI people who saw the technologies working and maybe weren't thinking as much about the market. I think the explosion of DALL-E 2 has caused people to sort of wake up to this. Look, is it happening next week? No. Is it happening inside of 24 months? Definitely, because the underlying technologies now exist and are cheap. And do you treat AI music companies as being companies? Do you treat them as artists? Do you treat them as, if there's going to be 100 different approaches? Like this is the kind of stuff we're thinking about, because this is going to get really loud.
Look, I've got a rule about this. If it happened in your life between the time you were born and say the time you are 30, it's normal. It'll probably be your career because it's so interesting. But if it happens in your life after the age of 30, it's against the natural order of things and it needs to be banned. So there's a bright line rule here.
Yeah.
But let's do this. Let's use this to extend our lives and have this panel again in 100 years.
Sure.
I'm for that. I think it'll be interesting.
I'll upload our consciousness up. One thing I'd like to think about to maybe as we start closing out is to think about how if you're a musician and you think my livelihood is at stake if ChatGPT eats my lunch or something like that, if Boomi eats my lunch. Think about where you make your money today. Is it through your recordings? Probably not, right? Is it through live music? Probably, right? That's live music is really where it's at. Am I going to want to listen, go pay $100 to go to a stadium to listen to ChatGPT or the Boomi spit out a song? No, I'm going to go watch the human, and I'm still going to pay $100 for that. So it's not going to eat your live income. Is it going to eat your cover song income? Are lots of people covering your music? Probably not, right? Is it going to eat your, I could sue somebody for copyright infringement income? Maybe, right? But that's really the only income that's really at stake, is that if you were going to sue somebody for copyright infringement, then this is your chance.
But again, I'm really about this. What about your AI income? Like we're not talking right now about AI income for songwriters. We're not talking about AI income for any of this stuff. Like we're still, I don't know, bad historical precedent, but we're like 8 months from Napster launching, right? and someone's looking at MP3s, and somebody's looking at this stuff, and they're saying like, what, what's going to happen? What's going to happen next? We have an opportunity here, I think, to skip over the Napster phase, get right to how do we build income for musicians if their work is, if they are part of a model, if they're opting into being a part of a model. Like the way you fix the opt-in problem is you create a lot of revenue opportunity. And if it's true, and I've got one more mind-blowing thing that I can't get out of my head to throw out here. If it's true that this technology will exist, right, inside of 24 months, and if it's true that I can just be like, hey Siri, like write me a Stroke song, or hey Boomy, write me a Stroke song, right, and about whatever's going on in my life right now, and then send it to my friend, and it's catchy and it's great and it's actually pretty good. And if you fast forward 100 years, right, how many Stroke songs are there going to be? I'm just picking the Strokes. I'm a fan of the Strokes. How many Stroke songs are there going to be? 100 million, 200 million, 10 billion, 50 billion? Then
on demand.
Right, but then you get into, okay, so 100 years from now, if that's going to happen, what are the chances that the best, as defined by commercial performance or defined by consumption or defined however you want to define best, what are the chances that the best songs in that market, in a trillions of songs market, going to actually be written by the original Strokes, right? And not by some sort of incredible derivative. That is the way I think we need to start thinking about the generative market. Because if that's the universe that's going to happen, and the Strokes get $0 from that, I just don't think we're going to see that world, right? I think that in that world, if there are 2 trillion derivative Stroke songs, or hundreds of millions of derivative Stroke songs, and there is a framework and there is a way to do that, that revenue will eclipse, right, whatever you're getting from streaming, whatever you're getting from the NFTs or whatever people are thinking about right now. Like if it's a derivative work, and if it has copyright, and if there's money that's owed, then what about the AI revenue, right? Throw up one more finger there, Damien, and say, how do we get people paid on this thing? Because I just think that's very, very soon we're going to need answers to that question.
Yeah, but what if you're a headhunter in the music industry? You're screwed. There's no hope.
I would say I think I agree 100% with what Alex said, that we're a week before radio started coming out, and then started expanding the musician's idea that music is limited to where I am. All of a sudden, it's not where I am anymore.
And they still don't pay.
Right.
Radio still doesn't pay.
That's right. And I would also say, yeah, that once you say, hey, give me a Stroke song, then you're incorporating that persona, the trademark. Right. And from there, yeah, for sure, the Strokes should get paid, because unless you say, if you like the Strokes, you'll love this new music. That's the kind of comparative analogy that trademark, if you love this perfume, if you like this perfume, you'll love this, my perfume, right? That's a trademarks thing. But I think you're right that a rising tide will float all boats, that if you pay the Strokes for that song, then they're more likely to be able to say, yeah, let's go ahead and ride the wave of radio, because it's going to make us more money.
Get me a lawyer who will defend me in the manner of Lawrence Tribe. There we go.
I'm building that, as you.
Thank you. Please.
And every other lawyer on the planet. We're building.
I've enjoyed this. I think we've gone as far as we're going to go on it today, but it's sparked a lot of thinking in my mind and a lot of creative thought, which is good. This is very positive. Creative outcome. Tom, thank you for having us here.
Let me jump in here. Well,
thanks for the use of the room.
Absolutely. You guys are welcome to come back anytime you want and carry on. I was reaching for my desk bong in the middle of it, and I couldn't find it. My mind was being blown so much. That was absolutely riveting, guys. And you all are the smartest guys in this room, and you got a lot of new fans among this audience. You probably have a few more detractors, but the fact is, keep doing what you're doing, because it's exciting, it's interesting, and who knows where it's going to lead, but it's going to be fun to watch. So thank you for coming, folks. Happy New Year. We'll see you here next Thursday at this appointed time. In the meantime, be safe, be nice to each other. That's it.
Thanks for the use of the hall.
Thanks so much. Super fun.